In the late 1880s, Vincent van Gogh became obsessed with Japan. He wanted to paint like a Japanese artist, live like a Japanese monk, and work in Japanese landscape. In the spring of 1888, he made the journey south to Provence, where, for a gloomy Dutchman, the country seemed like the mystical Oriental world he dreamed of. Among his paintings that summer were 4 extraordinary pictures of sunflowers. 30 years later, one of these sunflowers was bought by a collector from Japan, and tragically, at the very end of the Second World War, it was destroyed in a US bombing raid. But now, a pioneering project in Madrid is attempting to recreate 6 sunflowers, Van Gogh's lost sunflower masterpiece. In the terrifying endgame of the war in Japan, the atomic holocaust was accompanied by the firebombing of Japanese towns and cities. Amongst the casualties and destruction, the painting's 6 sunflowers was destroyed. Jeko Kame is the granddaughter of Koyata Yamamoto, the owner.
So only 9 days before the war actually ended, 2,000 bombs were showered on the Ashia, Nishinomiya. The
建物はもうみんな焼けましたもんで、みんな火事が焼けて、もう完全にやっぱり燃えかすもないぐらいに炭ばっかしの街並みですね。ただ石やらレンガなんかはそのまま残ってましたですけどね。
My mother thought she would lose her life at that point, so she couldn't really risk trying to save the painting. She had to fight for her life, and for my grandmother, bombing continued for a while. And when they came back, the painting was totally destroyed.
Amidst this human tragedy, the loss of a painting seems hardly worth a mention. But this was no ordinary work of art. 6 Sunflowers was the second of 7 sunflower paintings, 4 of which were produced in the summer of 1888, followed by 3 more the following winter. These studies in the color yellow, painted in Van Gogh's yellow house in Arles, symbolize a short period warmed by sunshine and optimism in a life otherwise dogged by depression, paranoia, and mental instability. The first of the sunflower paintings is in private ownership and rarely seen, but the other 5 each hang in major art galleries around the world. There is no doubt that if 6 sunflowers still existed, it would be world famous.
That picture is to a certain extent a very exciting picture, because if you look at that picture, you tend to think, wow, I would have seen that. I would love to have seen it, because it's so much more stylized, it's so much more colorful than the other ones are, and it's so much different than the other ones are, so you're lacking a kind of dimension.
This freaking out is going really wild. It is an extreme painting. It is going as far as possible into the colours of stained glass, these deep, deep blues, and then these red bounding lines, reddish bounding lines, and these intensely jagged shapes.
The project to recreate 6 sunflowers is being undertaken by Madrid-based art experts Factum Arte, led by Adam Lowe. This team of artists and technicians hope to create a unique digital lifelike replica of the lost masterpiece. But it's no easy task. They are working with a rare colour reproduction made in 1921, and upscaling this image into a metre-high canvas immediately presents a huge set of challenges.
So with the Van Gogh, we have only this picture, which is, they are very, very low in quality. You can see we put it to the actual size, 1:1 scale. It's very blurry and we lack a lot of information here. The main problem here would be the texture and set the color, because this might be a little bit far.
That, what looks good on your screen is not the data you have. And as soon as you get the data at the right size, you can see we've got film grain everywhere, we've got blur, we've got softness, we've got almost nothing you could really work from.
Because of the poor quality of the reference picture, the Factum team have big questions about both the actual colours used by Van Gogh and the surface texture created by his thick, sculptural use of paint.
In the case of Van Gogh, the loss is perhaps greater because of the way he used impasto, thick paint, and reproductions can never quite bring that across. We can only just imagine what it must have looked like in real life.
When Japan opened up to trade in the second half of the 19th century, strange and fascinating fragments of its culture began to arrive in Europe. Van Gogh fell under the spell of Japan in the late 1880s when he was living in Paris with his brother and benefactor, Theo. Like many artists of the period, he became enraptured by the Japanese ukiyo-e woodblock prints, which arrived in Europe almost accidentally as the wrapping paper for pottery and porcelain.
浮世絵の場合は今お話ししたように300年世界との交流がなかったものですからね。で独自のものが生まれてこういうふうに浮世絵っていうヨーロッパでは使わないこのすごく綺麗な色、植物の色。こういうものは同じものが何百枚できるもんですから、やはり1万円もんですとこれでも100万円とか200万円したかもわかりませんが、安い値段で庶民の手に入ったっていうヨーロッパの王侯貴族とまた違って庶民のこういう本当に手に入ったんじゃないかなと。
In many ways, Van Gogh didn't really understand Japan. He'd never been there, he had only read a little bit about it, but it was a sort of touchstone for him, and it represented some sort of ideal, artistic ideal that he was striving for.
He first saw Japanese prints, and he was very impressed by the colors.
From adolescence, Van Gogh had led a tortured existence. He struggled to hold down jobs and found it difficult to form relationships. This dark state of mind is reflected in his early paintings. However, the discovery of Japanese prints with their clean lines and pure colours inspired in him a new Oriental dream that he was determined to paint.
And he then began to read books and texts on Japan.
In February 1888, Van Gogh left Paris and headed south on an artistic expedition in search of independence, sunlight, and Japan.
I think that Vincent heads for Provence because since he can't actually hop on a plane to Japan, he'll go to somewhere almost equally exotic. And he's got the idea that Provence is a great place to go, and we will find the equivalent to Japan. A land where everything is the aesthetic, where nature itself is a powerful rush of chromatic sensations.
And remember, he'd come from the Netherlands, so even a low hill seemed a little bit like Mount Fuji. And he saw the landscape in terms of the way the Japanese might have interpreted it. Another comparison is the blossom. He arrived just before the blossom was coming out on the fruit trees in Provence, which is a lovely sight.
Et ce qui fait que quand Van Gogh aussi s'est mis à peindre quelquefois les amandiers, comme l'amandier que vous voyez derrière, quand on regarde son tableau qu'il a fait, ça ressemble un petit peu aussi aux estampes japonaises. Mais là, il traite juste l'amandier tel qu'il est, juste les fleurs d'amandier et le ciel derrière. On ne voit pas le tronc, on ne voit pas le champ à côté, on ne voit pas les gens, on ne voit rien, on voit juste les fleurs et le ciel. Et on distingue un peu quand même le vent.
For Van Gogh, this Japanese influence was much more than stylistic. He believed that the Japanese provided a model for a better way of living and offered him a new, more spiritual approach to his art.
Well, in the letter he writes, for example, what are the Japanese painters doing? Are they studying the distance between the Earth and the Moon? No. And the politics of the Bismarck? No. He just studies a simple blade of grass. And Japanese is somebody who live in the nature as if they themselves are flowers. So in that way, he imagined that Japanese was somebody who is living deeply in the nature and living in a very simple life and earning just a little money and just painting in the nature. That was his image of the Japanese in his Aro period.
In the later part of the 19th century, at the same time as the craze for Japan swept through Europe, Japanese artists and intellectuals also began to explore Western art and ideas. A leading writer, Saneatsu Mushinakoji, conceived a plan for a museum showcasing art from the West, with the hope that a painting by Van Gogh could be the centerpiece.
Mushinakoji was a very famous novelist. What he wanted to do was build this museum where everybody can see treasures, art from all around the world. So my grandfather decided to buy the painting for him, for the museum. Among several candidates, they chose the sunflower.
In the studio at Factum Arte, Jordi begins the recreation process by applying a mixture of wax and neutral acrylic paste over a blown-up print of the only surviving image of the picture.
What I'm doing now is trying to achieve one of our main goals in this picture of Van Gogh, which is to get back the texture to the image and even this feeling of the impasto that Van Gogh was using in the sunflowers.
Van Gogh's so-called impasto technique was achieved by applying large quantities of paint, often straight from the tube.
This kind of crisscross texture, constructing all the background, all the texture in the sunflowers. And so for that, I'm doing this first try with an acrylic putty and constructing all the texture. But later on, we will 3D scan, and then we can work on the 3D software with other source informations, other versions of texture, and also modeling in the software actually to recreate the surface of the picture.
As well as remaking the brush marks, the team also need to identify the exact colours used by Van Gogh.
So what I really love is from this array of yellows that we've got, some of which we know he's using,
yeah.
but we know he's using chrome yellows. Chrome yellows are now toxic, so we can't buy.
It's quite difficult to find them.
Adam and Geordie are looking at a range of pigments to try and work out the chromatic scheme of the painting.
What we've effectively done is assembled this range of yellow pigment that we think is going to give us the basis to get into the sunflowers.
This is an important step, but it's only the start of an immensely challenging and complex forensic investigation to try to identify both the colour and texture of every brushstroke in the painting. One of the greatest lost paintings, Van Gogh's 6 Sunflowers, came about as a result of his Japan-inspired journey to Provence and the city of Arles.
Vincent turns up in this alien town. He's never been anywhere in the south of Europe before, and they're all speaking a mystery language, Provençal. He's just got some money from his brother, so he spends it all on this house and getting it painted yellow.
Van Gogh's brother, Theo, funded and supported his entire existence as an artist, including the expedition to Arles.
Vincent and Theo, someone tried to write a joint biography of the two people because he saw them as, facets of a single organism.
It was this intense and symbiotic relationship, maintained through often daily correspondence, that gave Van Gogh the courage to keep going with his artistic dream.
Là, on est sur la place où c'est qu'autrefois il y avait la maison jaune de Van Gogh. D'ailleurs, vous voyez le tableau de Van Gogh, où c'est qui représente la maison jaune, voilà, qu'il avait loué. Et en fait, il y avait une petite ruelle, c'est-à-dire la même rue qui passe là, et derrière, vous avez le même bâtiment, lui n'a pas changé.
It was the yellow walls of the house that appealed to Van Gogh. Yellow was his favourite colour. For him, it symbolised sunshine, happiness and hope. As he wrote, "Sunshine, a light which, for want of a better word, I can only call yellow, pale sulphur yellow, pale lemon, gold. Oh, how beautiful yellow is."
Well, there is a change in his painting when he moved south from Paris. He began to explore colours when he was in Paris and seeing the work of the Impressionists. But in Arles, he became increasingly bold about his use of colour. The other change is that he puts much more paint on the canvas. We would call it impasto, so that he uses thick paint in a way that he hadn't done in Paris, which was unusual at the time because of very sort of vivid feel, and there's almost a 3D surface to the painting. So that's the other major change when he moved south.
Van Gogh's impasto texture has been recreated on a canvas with an acrylic paste. This canvas is now going to be laser scanned using a specially modified scanner for paintings to generate a digital 3D map of the surface.
So, in general, recording the relief of a painting is one of the first steps for making a facsimile, for making a reproduction of something that already exists. We have to be able to capture both color and relief information with the highest possible detail. In this case, it's slightly different.
Yeah,
right?
Actually, we don't have the source material, we don't have the physical object to scan. So we need to get a sense of the texture. That's what I've been working on this first version of the texture, doing by hand, handmade, following the strokes on the photograph that we have. So, and it's the texture I don't want to be disturbed by color and other things I just painted.
At the end, after this 3D scan, we will have a very accurate, very precise 3D model of that texture that Jordi has made, and it will be possible to be used in hundreds of ways to manipulate, to transform, to actually play with it in a way, so we can help recreating the lost painting.
Six Sunflowers was deeply influenced by Van Gogh's love affair with Japanese art. Not only did he paint his own copies of the woodblock prints, but he was powerfully indebted to their use of color.
まずは朝顔の赤を吸います。そして水をちょっとやっていただいて、で時計と反対回りにして、最後に絵の具をのせるようにすります。でバレンを持っていただいて、しっかり持って、でまず横バレンですね。これの次に今度はですね、このように青い版、それからこういう、緑色の版、1色2色3色4色5色5回繰り返すと最後にですね、こういうふうにこれで完成です。
The bold application of discrete blocks of brilliant color in the Japanese woodblock prints was seized upon by Van Gogh and his fellow artists, and it became an important influence in the development of a new, simpler painting language, which they called cloisonnism.
A cloison is a compartment of colour, and you make these thick lines, and this is particularly true in the six sunflowers, it would seem, that you've got very, very powerful bounding reddish, orangish lines between each block of colour. And again, you've got this intense rush of a radiant deep blue, and then just great wild hits of intense yellow. So it's a kind of combination of stained glass and of what the ukiyo-e prints offer that gives them the basis for a new stimulating aesthetic.
It was this bold new approach to painting that Van Gogh hoped could be further developed through a collaboration with the artist Paul Gauguin.
I think the reason that Gauguin actually turns up in Arles is that Gauguin's best dealer, the guy who's selling his pictures best, is Theo van Gogh. And he wants to do Theo a favour by looking after his brother. But Vincent has these magnificent, rather vague hopes for a community of artists. The best person that he could possibly get is this very impressive, groovy, rather rangy, dangerous guy, Paul Gauguin, who he met a little bit before he left Paris.
The image Van Gogh chose to decorate Gauguin's room was no accident.
One of the ideas Vincent had was that he would paint a series of sunflower paintings for Gauguin's bedroom. And then he would tell Gauguin, I've painted these wonderful pictures, you must come down and see them, they're hanging in the spare room.
Flower is absolutely central. It becomes the quintessence of Vincent's art because the flower is a natural phenomenon, but it's nature being extraordinary. It's this great burst of spectacular colour that stands out from the rest of the world. And the idea of seeds and of
growth and flourishing and dying.
At Factum Arte, work on this iconic image has now moved into the digital department, where it's being worked upon by Irene, a sculptor and 3D modeler.
Jordi, I just got the 3D scan of the painting you created from the Van Gogh Sunflowers.
Yeah.
It's working really well. So if you zoom in, you can really appreciate the brushstrokes you created, and you can perceive the flowers from the brushstrokes.
I'm a little bit worried about these spikes and noise there. Yeah.
I would improve the whole flower brushstrokes, so I would bring them out a bit more, and I would also compare with a real scan from, another painting from Van Gogh.
The scan from Jordi's acrylic surface has proved a useful starting point for the reconstruction, but it's clear that it has its limitations. For the recreation to fully succeed, the team will need to find a more scientific way of rebuilding Van Gogh's brush marks. From early on in his life, Vincent van Gogh seemed to have suffered psychologically. He struggled with relationships and finding his place in the world. Undoubtedly, this contributed to his manic approach to painting, as well as intensifying the extraordinary vision of the world he produced on canvas. In his agony, he was preoccupied with spirituality, hoping that his paintings could provide a kind of consolation for humanity through their radiance and colour.
What Van Gogh is trying to do, in a sense, it's groping towards a new idea of what painting might do. This idea that art needs to effect a spiritual transformation. It needs to change us right in our souls. And colour is the key. The idea that a shot of yellow is a stimulus to your whole psyche. His state of mind in August '88 is exuberant. He's been working furiously for 4 or 5 months, and he's kind of striding forward with this incredible productivity that he's already set up of getting 4 or 5 canvases a week is regular for him.
Quand on est passionné donc de peinture, malgré le temps, même si le vent peut rendre fou, la passion des fois l'emporte sur le vent et on se met à peindre. Et je pense que Van Gogh c'était la même chose, il peignait tous les jours, même quand il y avait du vent, même si c'était difficile. Et s'il était obligé de plier, ben des fois il rentrait chez lui et là il se mettait à peindre des natures mortes, des sujets de tous les jours, comme ça pourrait être une cafetière, ça pouvait être des pommes, voilà, comme par exemple les tournesols, les bouquets de tournesols.
Recreating one of these still lives, 6 sunflowers, using only a low-resolution picture has its limitations. Fortunately, it's possible to learn a huge amount from the study of one of the other sunflower paintings. The laboratories of the National Gallery in London have undertaken extensive tests on their sunflower painting, and Adam Lowe from Factum Arte has come to take a look at the results. Catherine Higgett has been analysing Van Gogh's use and application of individual paints and pigments in microscopic detail.
And then what's very nice about this new technique that we've recently acquired, which is scanning X-ray fluorescence spectroscopy, is that allows us to effectively extrapolate the information, the very precise information about the different mineral pigments that are present. And what we have is a series of peaks corresponding to different elements.
Alongside this colour analysis, Rachel Billing has been using a Lucida scanner, a technology pioneered by Factum Arte, to capture a detailed 3D map of the picture surface. The hope is that Van Gogh's impassioned brush marks can be translated directly onto the painting texture being reconstructed at Factum Arte.
And this is one of the paintings that from the moment we took delivery of the scanner I've wanted to scan, because obviously it has such interesting and amazing texture. You start to be able to see where individual brushstrokes have been pushed into each other, and you get to feel that how Van Gogh was working.
What we're going to attempt to do is we're going to attempt to sort of abstract, as if each of these was a letter in an alphabet, to assume he was using the same paintbrushes. The painting in Japan is painted only a few days before this, so we're assuming he didn't get a new delivery, he's using the same brushes, he's using the same paints, and we'll be able to extract these marks and in a 3D modelling software distort them to fit the marks that we can read on the photographic surface of the painting in Japan.
The man for whom the sunflowers were originally painted, Paul Gogh, was grudging with his compliments, but he was clearly impressed with the extraordinary canvases of yellow flowers that welcomed him to Arles.
Van Gogh was pleased with the way the sunflowers turned out, and he was delighted when Gauguin arrived and made polite comments about the sunflowers.
The most interesting painting Gauguin does as a result of his own stay in Arles is the painting he does of Vincent himself at work. He is painting Vincent's sunflowers because for Gauguin, this is where Vincent has found his own voice as a painter.
For a few months, the two artists painted side by side, often working on the same subjects.
They began by painting the same motifs, so it comes as no surprise that both in inclination, in what they were trying to achieve, and in the style, they were both individual artists, but inevitably influenced by what the other one was doing. They saw the end result, they saw how the artist was deciding to approach a subject.
But Gauguin struggled to cope with the manic behaviour of his host. It was becoming clear that the yellow house was not big enough for both of them.
Vincent's energies, he's been on an 8-month high all the time he's been in Arles. His own psychology is crashing. This bipolar man is coming to a crisis. Obviously, he's been drinking hard too, smoking hard and so on. And after Gauguin shows him the portrait he's done of him, they go out to a bar and Vincent lobs a glass at him across the table. And Gauguin says, I think I really can't handle it. This is getting physically dangerous, living with you.
As the year in which Van Gogh painted the sunflowers drew to a close, his crisis in Arles reached its famously grisly denouement.
L'après-midi du 23 décembre 1888, quand Van Gogh a reçu une lettre de son frère Théo lui disant qu'il allait se marier, lui s'est dit tout de suite, mon frère il va me laisser tomber, comment je vais vivre quoi.
Vincent, that day, suspecting that Gauguin wants to leave him, thrusts a piece of paper in his hand saying, look at this item in the newspaper, it says, the murderer fled the scene.
And Gogh goes, oh, this is getting too hairy, I can't handle it, get me out of here. So he goes off and spends the night in a hotel. The next morning, he's woken up, the cops saying, there's blood all over the scene. You've heard about your pal there. They go back with it, following this trail of blood to the Yellow House, where they find Vincent in a comatose state with his ear severed and a massive loss of blood.
Van Gogh's happiness, his yellow mood, was built upon his brotherly relationships. For him, any threat to those ties was itself a kind of severing of the flesh. In the same week that the atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, American planes firebombed the Kobe suburb of Ashiya. Takashi Mizuno was 9 years old.
焼け野原でね、もう半日ぐらいね、朝午前中にこうみんな焼けて、これで焼けな焼夷弾落ちなくても火の粉がこういって、それが種で家が焼けたりね、そんなも結構ありましたんでね。で私はね記事も書いてますけど、逃げた方でね、これとこれぐらいの間隔のとこで真ん中こっち焼けこれで真ん中取ったらもう本当亡くなってる人が多いんですよ。道の真ん中でやけど真っ黒けでね、わーやからもう黒焦げで。
It was here that 6 sunflowers was turned to ashes, a source of lifelong sadness for the owner, Koyata Yamamoto, who had gone to considerable effort to protect his painting.
My grandfather tried to put it in a safety vault in a bank, but all the banks refused. But he tried to protect the painting. He tried every method, but he couldn't find the best way. Share his sense of loss, and I understand why he bought the painting, why it was more important than money or business. Because one painting, one piece of music can really change your whole life. And he knew that.
Yamamoto clearly understood the innate power of Van Gogh's painting. It was an understanding that he shared with the first and greatest believer in the painter, the man who grew up with him, the man who encouraged, supported, and cared for him on a daily basis, his brother, Theo.
The two sides of the coin. Vincent once said that Theo, his brother, played a major part in the creation of his pictures.
Van Gogh's crisis in Arles had been triggered by fear of abandonment by his brother, as well as the threat of Gauguin's departure. But his crisis was further exacerbated by the distrust and fear of the locals.
Van Gogh était certainement un homme plus ouvert aux Arlésiens et aux Arlésiennes que ce que les Arlésiens et Arlésiennes étaient ouverts envers Van Gogh.
They couldn't understand why an artist was working, what an artist did. He worked long hours, he seemed obsessed by painting. So they found him a very strange and bizarre person. And after the ear incident, they were worried that he might turn a knife on them. The neighbours drew up a petition to ask that he be removed, and that really was the last straw for Van Gogh. He then realised that he could not continue to live in the Yellow House.
After further episodes of mental breakdown, in the spring of 1889, Van Gogh reluctantly relinquished the Yellow House and moved into an asylum in the town of Saint-Rémy-de-Provence.
Ici, nous sommes devant le cloître de la basilique Saint-Paul de Mausolée, où Van Gogh a été accueilli après s'être coupé l'oreille au mois de décembre à Arles. Et quand il rentre par... Et là, vous avez en face la chapelle, où c'est que les malades peuvent venir se recueillir pour prier, quoi.
At Factum Arte in Madrid, Irene, the digital sculptor, has been working with the data captured from the scan of the sunflowers at the National Gallery in London.
So after we got the Lucida scan from the National Gallery painting, I made a huge collage of all the bits and pieces from that painting and created the sunflower lost.
So what, you were basically extracting brush marks and distorting them to fit the shapes that we had
exactly
on the bad reproduction that we've got.
Yeah.
I mean, the first thing, just looking at it cold and not having seen this before, is it's just incredibly exciting. So basically, this is going to be the complete solution to getting that painting to feel like a Van Gogh.
Irene's digital file is now handed over to the modelling workshop, where it's being turned into a physical representation of the painting surface. All that's missing is the final colour data.
From the data that we get in the National Gallery, we are now reconstructing the image from the Sanetsu Memorial Museum, the photograph, and change that colors to a more believable colors, and more close colors to the Van Gogh's palette.
Now the team are ready to bring the whole painting back into the physical world. They start by creating a silicone mold. When the final picture file is ready, it is printed on top of this textured surface. Once everything is perfectly aligned, the final printing gets underway. 2 years after the summer of the sunflowers in Arles, Van Gogh had moved back north and was living in a small village not far from Paris. In his last ever letter to Theo, he wrote, "My dear brother, I'd really like to write you about many things, but I sense the pointlessness of it. I risk my life for my own work, and my reason has half foundered in it."
We don't know exactly what happened, but 2 months after he was there, he went up to the wheat fields in the afternoon carrying a gun and shot himself. And 2 days after that, he died of his wound. Sunflowers were planted on his grave for decades in honor of him.
Japan's love of Van Gogh has continued to grow since the Second World War, a passion affirmed in 1987 by the purchase of another sunflower painting for more than £25 million, 3 times more than any painting had ever fetched at auction at that date.
ここの美術館にあるこのゴッホの絵ですけれども、これは芦屋の失われた ひまわりの絵の後に描かれた、大きなサイズの、たくさんひまわりのある絵のうちの1点ですよね。やっぱりゴッホが欲しいというですね、その熱意というのは、非常に素晴らしいものじゃないかなというふうにまず思います。
Well, typical for the Japanese reception of Van Gogh was that they were more interested in the man, the Van Gogh himself, and they wanted to learn something from that great man about art and about life, everything. But after that, they got more and more interested and impressed by his paintings.
This is one of the haikus that my grandfather wrote. 引き止めていたき思いやボタンの夜. The flower, the peony. He wanted to express the brevity of everything beautiful. So even though it was a beautiful night, he knew it won't last forever. And it is beautiful because it won't last forever.
After 5 months of intensive work at Factum Arte on the recreation of 6 sunflowers, painter and Van Gogh expert Julian Bell has travelled to Madrid to take a look at the final result.
What we want is really your immediate and then considered impression about what we've done. So we've got a couple of versions on the go at the moment that we're trying to draw to a close. They still need a lot of expert advice and opinions, but the process we followed, basically we reconstruct the entire surface. So we try and identify every mark that we can here, and we take brush marks from the painting in London, and this is built all with brush marks that come off the painting in London. And so what we're doing with these pictures is desperately get inside the head of this person. And it's like a performance.
It is a performance, but it's a performance based on a very, very concerted study and sense of method. It's a precious object. It's a remarkable object in itself. It's a work of art, but a peculiar work of art. A new sort of work of art, if you like.
Of course, the real 6 sunflowers will never be seen again, but this recreation is a means of keeping the memory of the painting alive.
It's a wonderful project. It's a crazy project, but I'm an artist and I love crazy projects. It's devoted. As a mere plonky painter, a very low-tech painter, I expect my objects to be vulnerable and ephemeral. What a Factum Arte is doing is really making the idea that everything could be resurrected. The resurrection of the body could happen.